Hey there, all you philosophy fans out there, ready to dive deep into something, well, something you already know a lot about, I'm sure, but that we're going to explore in a whole new way.
I'm excited.
That's great to hear. So today's deep dive is all about civil rights.
Civil rights.
You got it. And to guide us on this journey, we're going to be taking a close look at the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on civil rights.
Sounds like a good roadmap.
It is. It really is.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to give too much away, but just to get those philosophical wheels turning, did you know that civil rights hasn't always meant what it means today? In fact, it's gone through some pretty radical transformations over the centuries.
That's interesting.
Yeah. We're talking three major conceptions from post-Civil War America to all the way to, today's social movements.
Wow. And get this, we're also going to be tackling that philosophical behemoth, the anti-discrimination principle.
Oh, boy.
Buckle up, because things are about to get conceptually complex.
I'm ready for the challenge. Great. So, to kick things off, let's take a trip back in time. Way back.
Okay.
Imagine we're in ancient Rome, just hanging out in the forum, debating law and philosophy with the likes of Cicero.
Ah, the good old days.
Right. So in that context, civil rights had a very different meaning than what we associate with it today.
Yeah, it was less about universal human rights and more about what it meant to be a Roman citizen.
Exactly. It was about the legal rights that came with being a citizen, which often stood in stark contrast to, natural rights.
So it was about the privileges that separated a Roman citizen from, say, a slave.
Precisely, like the right to marry or own property or even to make a will.
Those were all considered civil rights back then.
It's kind of mind-blowing, isn't it? I mean, this concept that we see is so fundamental to justice was once used to reinforce social hierarchies.
Yeah, it really makes you think.
It does. Makes you wonder about, can we really rely on legal systems to tell us what's right and just?
Right. For a
philosopher, exactly. This raises all sorts of questions about the relationship between positive law, like the rights given by the state, versus natural law, those inherent rights that exist regardless of any human authority.
Are these Roman civil rights more aligned with a Hobbesian view where rights are granted by the sovereign, or are we seeing hints of a more Lockean notion of pre-political rights?
That is such a great point. And this historical perspective isn't limited to ancient Rome either.
Oh, yeah.
We see a similar understanding of civil rights in Blackstone's Commentaries, which was like the legal Bible for English common law.
Oh, absolutely. Blackstone, writing in the 18th century, he basically reiterates this idea that civil rights are tied to citizenship, whereas natural rights are inherent to all humans.
It's like we're witnessing the very origins of a concept that would later become central to modern social justice movements.
Right.
But how do we get from there to, say, the civil rights era in the U.S.? How do we bridge that historical gap?
Well, the journey takes us through, a pretty pivotal moment in American history.
The post-Civil War period.
Exactly. This is where we see a major shift in how people thought about and actually used the term civil rights.
Right. Like the 1866 Civil Rights Act.
Yes. That's a landmark piece of legislation right there. It wasn't just about giving basic legal protections.
It was about dismantling the legacy of slavery.
Exactly. The goal was to make sure that all citizens had equal protection under the law, regardless of race or whether they had been enslaved before.
And the act didn't just talk about these ideas in some vague way. It laid out very specific rights.
Yes. This is where things get really interesting, I think, especially from a philosophical standpoint, because the act guaranteed the right to things like making and enforcing contracts, owning property, testifying in court.
Wow. So basically the right to fully participate in society.
Exactly. It's about having the rights you need to actually live a decent life. And critically, it guaranteed equal protection under the law, which meant that everyone would benefit from the same laws protecting their personal safety.
So we're seeing a move away from that narrow view of civil rights as just being tied to citizenship and toward a much broader understanding that emphasizes, equal protection and participation in society as a whole.
Right.
Would you say that this is kind of like Rawls's idea of fair equality of opportunity,
Yeah.
like making sure everyone has a fair shot regardless of their background?
Absolutely. This shift really resonates with Rawls' thinking about primary goods, those essential things that people need to pursue their own version of a good life.
Like basic rights and liberties.
Exactly.
Right.
And these early civil rights the right to a contract, the right to own property, the right to legal protection, those would definitely fall under that category of primary goods. They're fundamental to a just society. They lay the foundation for individual flourishing.
It's a really powerful vision of justice, isn't it?
It is.
But, the path to achieving that vision was far from smooth.
Oh, yeah.
That's where the Supreme Court enters the picture, right?
Sadly, yes.
Yeah. With a series of decisions that limited the federal government's power to actually enforce these rights against individuals and states.
Yeah, they basically chipped away at that robust vision of equality that was laid out in the 1866 Act.
It's really a shame because it led to a decline in that more inclusive understanding of what civil rights could mean.
It is.
But at the same time, it set the stage for the next chapter in our story, the rise of the anti-discrimination principle.
Right. This is where we enter more familiar territory.
Yeah, the civil rights era, the fight for racial equality, gender equality, and all the other movements that followed.
Exactly. But before we jump into that era, it's worth pausing to reflect on, what this setback actually tells us about the limits of law.
Like, can we really achieve true equality just by writing down rights in legal documents? Or do we need, a more fundamental change in how people think and act?
That's the question, isn't it? I mean, are legal rights enough to overcome deeply ingrained systems of oppression? Or do we need a more profound shift in social attitudes and beliefs?
And that question leads us right into the heart of all the philosophical debates about civil rights that are still going on today.
It really does. It's a question that will guide us as we explore, the complexities of the anti-discrimination principle.
Ready when you are. Let's get into it.
Okay, so we've seen that just having laws on the books doesn't automatically make things equal, right?
Yeah, it's not a magic wand.
Right, and that brings us to the 20th century and the rise of the anti-discrimination principle.
Yeah, it feels like the next logical step, right?
Yeah.
If those early civil rights laws couldn't fully create equality, maybe the focus had to shift to fighting the systems that were preventing people from accessing those rights in the first place.
Exactly. It's about tackling the root of the problem, and that's where things get a little complicated.
Complicated legally and philosophically.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the Civil Rights Acts of the 1960s, with their emphasis on eliminating discrimination based on things like race, sex, religion, national origin, and later disability.
Right. And eventually sexual orientation, too.
Right. These acts marked a huge turning point.
It's all about leveling the playing field, right? Making sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to succeed no matter who they are or where they come from.
Yeah, that's the idea, but it's a lot trickier to put into practice than it might sound.
Oh, I know it. And this is where I think philosophy really comes in handy.
Absolutely. Because the anti-discrimination principle, while simple on the surface, raises some seriously tricky philosophical questions.
Like, what exactly counts as discrimination? Is it just about, deliberate acts of prejudice? Or does it include those more subtle biases that we find baked into our institutions and social norms?
And how do we even measure equality?
Right. Is it enough to just treat everyone the same way? Or does real equality require us to acknowledge and address the historical disadvantages and the systemic inequalities that some groups face?
These are tough questions. And then you've got the practical challenges of actually implementing and enforcing anti-discrimination laws.
Like, how do you prove that someone intended to discriminate? And how do we balance the rights of individuals with the need to address inequalities that affect entire groups?
It's a real philosophical minefield.
It is. But let's not get too abstract here.
Okay.
Do you remember that landmark case we talked about earlier? Griggs v. Duke Power Company.
Oh, yeah. That one's a classic.
I think it's a great example to ground this discussion.
Definitely. That 1971 Supreme Court case was huge. It fundamentally changed the legal definition of discrimination.
How so?
Well, before Griggs, the focus was mainly on proving intent. Like, did someone set out to discriminate against someone else?
Yeah, it had to be deliberate, right.
Right. But Griggs shifted the focus to impact. So even if a company didn't explicitly mean to discriminate, if their policies had a disproportionate impact on a protected group,
then it could still be considered discrimination under the law.
Exactly. The court recognized that discrimination can be subtle, unintentional, even hidden in practices that seem totally neutral on the surface.
So they introduced the concept of disparate impact.
Right. And that's had a massive impact on employment law and anti-discrimination efforts ever since.
It's like realizing that the game was rigged all along, even if the people running it weren't consciously trying to favor one side or the other.
Yeah, it forces us to look beyond individual bad actors and to examine the structures that are perpetuating inequality.
Right. Like those invisible forces that are shaping the playing field.
And that's a crucial insight for philosophers. because it makes us rethink how we understand justice. It's not just about individual rights and responsibilities anymore. It's about recognizing the impact of these systemic structures on different groups.
Now it makes me think of Foucault and his ideas about power.
Oh, yeah, how power operates through these seemingly neutral institutions and discourses.
Like it's woven into the fabric of society.
Exactly. But we can't forget that the anti-discrimination principle has faced its share of criticism, too.
Oh, right from both ends of the political spectrum.
Yeah, and each side raises valid points about the limits and the potential downsides of this approach to achieving equality.
Okay, let's dive into those critiques then, because I think they'll really help us understand the philosophical tensions at play here. I'm particularly interested in those economic critiques. Like, how can a principle that's all about promoting equality be at odds with economic principles?
Well, some economists, especially those who are really into free market ideas, argue that anti-discrimination laws are actually bad for the economy and even for the very groups they're supposed to be helping.
Oh, really? How so?
Their argument is that in a truly free market, discrimination would naturally disappear because it just wouldn't be profitable.
Interesting. So, like, businesses that discriminate would end up losing out because they wouldn't be able to attract the best talent.
Exactly. Economists like Gary Becker, who won a Nobel Prize for his work, argued that discrimination would be economically unsustainable in the long run.
It sounds logical in a way, but it also feels kind of simplistic. Like, doesn't it ignore the power dynamics and the historical injustices that still shape how the market works?
That's a major criticism.
Yeah.
And that's where the critiques from critical legal studies and critical race theory come in.
Right. They offer a more radical perspective.
They argue that focusing on individual rights and legal remedies just isn't enough to address the systemic nature of discrimination.
So they're saying that the anti-discrimination principle, while well-intentioned, is still operating within a system that's built on and perpetuates inequality.
Exactly. It's like trying to fix a crumbling building with a fresh coat of paint.
Right. It doesn't address the underlying structural problems.
Thinkers like Derek Bell, a pioneer of critical race theory, argued that racism is so deeply embedded in American society that legal reforms alone can't get rid of it.
They're calling for a more fundamental change in how power is distributed and a real reckoning with the historical injustices that continue to affect us today.
Right. It's not just about stopping individual acts of discrimination. It's about transforming the very structures of society that privilege some groups at the expense of others.
And then there are the feminist critiques, which add yet another layer of complexity.
Absolutely. Feminist legal scholars have pointed out that while the anti-discrimination principle has been crucial for advancing women's rights, it often falls short of achieving true equality.
Because just treating women the same as men doesn't take into account the unique obstacles and disadvantages they face in a patriarchal society.
Exactly. Formal equality, like treating everyone the same on paper, doesn't address the underlying power imbalances or the gendered social norms that still disadvantage women.
So it's like saying, okay, everyone has the right to vote, but then ignoring the fact that women might face intimidation or harassment at the polls.
Or that they might be discouraged from running for office in the first place.
It's not just about having the right. It's about being able to exercise that right freely and equally.
Right. Thinkers like Catherine McKinnon have argued that the law itself often reflects and reinforces male dominance, which makes it really hard to achieve genuine equality within existing legal frameworks.
Yeah, so we've got this multifaceted concept of civil rights grounded in the anti-discrimination principle, but facing critiques from all sides.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Where do we go from here, then? Is the anti-discrimination principle, despite its limitations, still a valuable tool in the fight for justice? Or do we need to completely rethink how we approach equality?
These are the big questions. And while we might not have all the answers, I think just wrestling with these complexities helps us understand the ongoing struggle for civil rights.
I agree. And as we move into the 21st century, we're seeing a new wave of civil rights movements, emerging ones, that are pushing the boundaries of what we traditionally think of as civil rights.
Right. They're challenging us to think more broadly about what a truly just and equitable society would look like.
And this brings us to the idea of civil rights as rights to flourish.
A framework that goes beyond simply preventing discrimination and focuses on creating the conditions for all individuals to thrive.
It's like we're expanding the very definition of justice. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. We've gone from ancient Rome, where civil rights was all about the legal perks being a citizen, to the 20th century, with its focus on anti-discrimination.
Right.
And now here we are in the 21st century talking about civil rights as rights to flourish.
It's a big shift, for sure.
It feels like we're reimagining what justice could look like.
Yeah, instead of just protecting people from harm or ensuring formal equality, this new framework is about actively creating the conditions where everyone has the chance to reach their full potential.
It sounds kind of utopian, doesn't it?
Uh,
Like, are we really talking about building a society that not only prevents oppression, but actively supports well-being and human flourishing?
it's definitely ambitious, but the exciting thing is that this idea is already starting to take shape in a lot of the social movements that are happening right now.
Oh, really? Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, take the environmental justice movement, for instance. It's not just about protecting the environment as a whole. It's about making sure that communities that have been disproportionately affected by pollution and environmental damage have access to clean air and water and healthy living conditions.
So it's about recognizing that environmental rights are intertwined with social justice and human well-being.
Exactly. And this framework applies to other areas too, like the fight for affordable health care.
Oh yeah, healthcare is definitely becoming more and more central to discussions about civil rights.
It's not just about being able to see a doctor when you're sick, it's about recognizing healthcare as a fundamental human right, something that's essential for people to live a healthy and productive life.
Right. And what about the movement for gun safety? That seems to be gaining momentum as a civil rights issue, too.
Absolutely. It's about protecting the basic right to live free from the fear of gun violence, especially for communities that are being hit hardest by gun violence.
It strikes me that all these different movements, while they have different goals, they all share this underlying belief that a truly just society is one that actively supports well-being of everyone.
And that's where things get really interesting from a philosophical perspective because it forces us to ask, what does it actually mean to flourish? What are those essential conditions that people need to live a good life?
Wow, those are huge questions. Like, are we talking about Aristotle's idea of eudaimonia, living a life of virtue and reason? Or are we thinking more along the lines of the capabilities approach, where the focus is on expanding people's freedom to choose and act?
This is where your expertise as a philosopher comes in because defining what flourishing means is not easy at all. It requires us to really dig into ethical theories and political philosophy and even consider how different cultures view what constitutes a good life.
It's a challenging task, but it's also really exciting. It means that the fight for civil rights isn't just about securing legal protections or dismantling oppressive systems. It's about imagining and creating a society where everyone can reach their full potential.
It's a vision worth striving for, but even as we acknowledge the progress that's been made and the momentum behind this Rights to Flourish framework, we need to be realistic about the challenges ahead.
What kind of challenges are we talking about?
Well, first off, how do we define flourishing in a way that actually means something and that can apply to everyone? I mean, we live in a society with so many different values and ideas about what a good life looks like.
So how do we reconcile those differences and come up with a shared understanding of what it means to flourish? It's like that classic philosophical debate about universalism versus relativism, but playing out in the context of civil rights.
Exactly. Do we try to come up with a universal standard of well-being, or do we acknowledge that different cultures and individuals might have different ideas about what a good life entails?
Right. It's a tough one. And even if we figure out how to define flourishing, there's still the question of how to put that vision into practice.
Right. How do we actually measure something like flourishing? And how do we design institutions and systems that promote well-being without taking away people's individual freedom?
These are questions that are going to require a lot of careful thinking and open discussion, not just among philosophers, but among policymakers, activists, and everyday people.
And it's a conversation that needs to happen on a global scale. Our deep dive today has mainly focused on the U.S., but the issue of civil rights and human flourishing is relevant all over the world.
It makes you wonder, can we even talk about universal civil rights when ideas about justice and equality are so different across cultures? Is it even possible to find common ground and work towards a more just and equitable world for everyone?
I hope you'll keep thinking about those questions long after our deep dive is over. Because the fight for civil rights isn't a destination, it's a journey. It's a conversation that needs our constant attention and our willingness to engage with these complex issues and our commitment to creating a better future for all.
Well said. This deep dive has been incredibly thought-provoking, and I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of what civil rights means and why it matters.
It's been great exploring these ideas with you. And to everyone listening out there, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into civil rights. Until next time, keep those philosophical wheels turning.